You want me to fix your helicopter again? Sure. But first, someone in this building is going to explain to me where my check went. When single dad Marcus Cole fixes a grounded helicopter for Halcyon Aviation using a calibration protocol he invented himself, the company wipes his name from their records and refuses to pay, believing that no paper trail means no obligation. What they don't know is that without Marcus, no one on Earth can operate that aircraft again. Caught between them is Diana Voss, Halcyon's sharp-edged in-house attorney who has handed the job of making Marcus disappear quietly and legally. But the deeper she digs into the file she was told never to open, the more she realizes she isn't protecting a company, she's protecting a crime. And the man she was sent to silence may be the only honest person in the building. The lobby of Halcyon Aviation's regional headquarters smelled the way all expensive buildings smell when they don't want you to feel welcome. Cool, recycled air, faint leather, and the particular silence of carpet that costs more per square foot than most people's car payments. Marcus Cole noticed all of it, the way a mechanic notices the sound of an engine running wrong. Not with alarm, just with the quiet, practiced certainty that something was off. He'd been in this building twice before. The first time 14 months ago when a project manager named Reed Calloway had called him at 7 in the morning with a voice that was doing its best to sound calm, and failing, their Airbus H145 had developed a fault in the electromechanical actuator assembly that none of their certified technicians could isolate, and they had a charter flight contracted for the following week that they absolutely could not cancel. The second time was 3 weeks after that, when the helicopter flew clean, and Reed shook his hand in the hangar and told him the check was being processed. That was the last time anyone at Halcyon had spoken to him with anything resembling good faith. Today was the third visit, and Marcus had given himself one rule before walking through the glass doors. He was not going to raise his voice. The woman at the front desk looked up with a smile that was warm in the way of something rehearsed. Marcus gave her his name, told her he was there to speak with someone in accounts payable, or legal, whoever was available, regarding an outstanding payment. She made a phone call. She smiled again. She asked him to take a seat. He didn't. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, his jacket the kind of clean that took effort when you were raising a 9-year-old on your own. And he waited. The woman who came down from the elevator 12 minutes later was not from accounts payable. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a way that was functional rather than styled, a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead like she'd forgotten they were there. She walked like someone who had places to be and had learned to move through the world accordingly. She extended a hand. "Mr. Cole, I'm Diana Voss. I'm with Halcyon's legal team." Marcus shook it. Her grip was direct. "Legal," he said. "That's interesting. I came about a payment." "I know why you're here." She didn't say it unkindly. "Is there somewhere you'd like to talk?" He looked around the lobby. "Here's fine." Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise, not quite respect. A calibration. "All right," she said. "Here." She had a folder. She opened it, and he could see his own name at the top of a document, which meant they'd been expecting him, which meant someone had decided in advance how this conversation was going to go. He filed that away. "Mr. Cole," Diana said, "I've reviewed the situation thoroughly, and I want to be straightforward with you. Halcyon has no record of a formal service agreement with you for the work performed on the H145 in March. There's no signed contract, no purchase order, no vendor registration on file. Without those documents?" "Reed Calloway called me at 7 in the morning, Marcus said. "He told me the regular maintenance team couldn't find the fault. He asked me to come in. I came in. I spent 11 days diagnosing and repairing an actuator assembly failure that was 17 hours away from grounding that aircraft permanently, and I fixed it." The helicopter flew. Reed shook my hand and told me the check was coming. "I understand that's your account of events. You want me to fix your helicopter again?" Marcus said. His voice was very level. "Sure. But first, someone in this building is going to explain to me where my check went." Diana didn't flinch. She looked at him over the folder with the particular expression of someone deciding whether to be honest or professional, and choosing for just a moment to be both. Mr. Cole, I'm not in a position to authorize payment on an undocumented claim. What I can tell you is that if you have any written communication, emails, text messages, anything that establishes the scope of work and an agreed-upon rate, that would be the appropriate avenue for us to revisit the matter. I have texts. From Reed Calloway's personal number? From Reed Calloway's number, yes. She wrote something in the margin of her document. I'll need copies of those. You'll get them through my attorney, Marcus said, when I file. She looked up. For the first time in the conversation, something in her shifted, not softened exactly, adjusted. You're planning to file a claim. I'm planning to do what I should have done 3 months ago, instead of giving you time to do the right thing on your own. He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than anger. $14,200. That's what we agreed. That's what I'm owed. I have a son. I have a mortgage. I have a business to run. I'm done waiting. Diana closed the folder. I hear you, Mr. Cole. I don't need you to hear me, he said, not unkindly. I need Halcyon to pay me. He left the building the way he'd entered it, without hurry, without performance, through the glass doors and into the April afternoon light. He sat in his truck for a moment, not because he needed to collect himself, but because he wanted to think clearly before he called the one attorney he knew who owed him a favor. His phone buzzed. A text from a number labeled simply Eli School, which was the label he'd set up so his son could reach him during the day without going through the office. It said, Dad, did you eat lunch yet? With no question mark, because Eli had opinions about punctuation in texts, and the opinion was that it slowed things down. Marcus smiled, which he hadn't done once inside the building. He typed back, working on it, meet you at 3. And then he started the truck and drove. He picked Eli up at 3:15, which was 15 minutes later than he'd promised, and exactly on time according to Eli's internal clock, which ran on its own system and always had. Eli was 9 years old and small for his age, and had his mother's way of looking at things, which meant he looked at everything carefully before he decided what to think about it. He climbed into the passenger seat with his backpack and a drawing he'd done in art class of what appeared to be a very aggressive bird. What is that? Marcus asked. It's an eagle, Eli said. Miss Patterson said it looked like a chicken. She's wrong. It does look a little like a chicken. Dad. In the best possible way. Marcus pulled out of the school loop and into afternoon traffic. How was the rest of it? Fine. Tyler Reeves said his dad has a helicopter. His dad probably has a helicopter. Eli looked at the drawing. Do we have a helicopter? We have a truck. Yeah. Eli considered this with the philosophic algravity unique to 9-year-olds. But you fixed one. I fix a lot of things. The one for that company. The big one. Eli folded the eagle drawing carefully along a line he'd clearly pre-planned. Did they pay you yet? Marcus kept his eyes on the road. One of the things about raising a kid alone was that they paid attention to everything, because they only had one parent to watch. Eli had been listening to the edges of phone calls and kitchen table silences for as long as Marcus could remember. Not yet, Marcus said. We're working it out. How? The right way. Marcus checked his mirror. Through a lawyer. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, is the helicopter still broken? Marcus glanced at him. What makes you ask that? Eli shrugged with one shoulder, which was his tell for when he'd figured something out and wasn't sure if he was supposed to have. Because you fixed it with your own thing, your special calibration thing, the one you invented. So if they don't have your notes... Eli, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. Marcus turned onto their street. The houses here were modest and close together, and most of the lawns were doing their best. Their own was slightly better than average because Eli had taken an interest in it last summer, and Marcus had learned not to argue with Eli's interests. The gist is that I used a calibration protocol I developed myself. It's not in any manual. I built a component to match it." He paused. "Nobody else has those specs. So nobody else can run the helicopter." Theoretically. Eli looked out the window with an expression Marcus recognized as his mother's, the one that meant he was doing math. "Is that good or bad?" Marcus pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. "Depends on who you ask," he said. He sat with that for a moment after Eli climbed out and ran inside. The afternoon was still and yellow warm. The kind of April afternoon that tries to convince you the year is going to be fine. Marcus sat with his hands on the steering wheel and thought about the woman in the lobby. The woman with the folder and the reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the way she'd said, "I hear you," like she'd meant it more than she'd intended to. He thought about $14,200 and what it would mean to have it. Then he went inside to make dinner. Diana Voss stayed in the office until almost 8 that night, which was not unusual for her, and which was the kind of fact she had learned not to examine too closely. The building was quieter now, the lobby dark below the city, doing its evening shift outside the windows. She sat with the folder open in front of her and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago and hadn't been touched since. The file on Marcus Cole was thin. That was the first problem. She'd expected thin, undocumented contractors often left thin files, but this was thin in a specific way. Not the thinness of someone who'd never had an official relationship with Halcyon. The thinness of something that had been edited. There were gaps in the maintenance logs from the first quarter of the previous year, references to a specialist consultant in interdepartmental emails that stopped suddenly in mid-March and picked up again in late April, as though someone had removed the middle section and hoped no one would notice the seam. She pulled up the internal vendor database, searched for Cole Marcus. No results. Searched the archived records going back 3 years. No results. She tried the hangar access logs, the electronic records of who had badged in and out of the maintenance facility. And there it was, a visitor badge. 31 individual entries across 11 days in March of the previous year under the name M. Cole, issued under Reed Calloway's employee number as the authorizing party. Reed Calloway, who had been transferred to the Denver office in June of last year. She wrote his name on a notepad and drew a circle around it. Then she wrote flight log beside it and drew a question mark, because something she'd seen in the margins of the maintenance records, a reference number that didn't match any file she could locate, had been nagging at her since that afternoon. And nagging was not something Diana Voss had learned to ignore. She found the reference 7 Alpha. It appeared exactly once in the record she had access to, in a handwritten notation in the physical maintenance binder that someone had partially erased. The notation read, "Actuator fault reference, prior incident CFL7-Alpha." For context, she searched the digital records for flight log 7 Alpha. The search returned 0 results. Diana sat with that for a long moment, the city moving quietly beyond the window, the coffee cold in its cup. Then she closed the folder, turned off her desk lamp, and drove home in the dark, thinking about a man who hadn't raised his voice once in a conversation that most people would have screamed through, and about a file that should have existed and didn't. She was back in the office at 7:15 the next morning, before anyone else on the legal team arrived, and she spent the first 40 minutes of the day going through the physical archives in the basement storage room, which smelled of old paper and climate control and the specific institutional sadness of documents no one had touched in years. She was looking for flight log 7 Alpha in the paper records on the reasonable assumption that if it had been scrubbed from the digital system, whoever had done the scrubbing might not have thought about the paper trail. She found something. Not the log itself, that was genuinely gone if it had ever been stored here, which she was no longer certain of. What she found was a single page of what appeared to be an internal incident summary dated 14 months ago, filed under a miscellaneous maintenance category that had no clear organizational logic. It was written in the flat, affectless language of someone trying very hard not to say anything specific. It referenced a non-reportable technical incident during a pre-flight check involving the H145 and noted that the incident had been resolved internally without impact to scheduled operations. Non-reportable. She circled that word. Below it, in different handwriting, someone's addition after the fact, she guessed were the initials G.H. and a date 3 days after the incident summary. Gerald Holt, Chief Financial Officer. His initials on an operational incident report made no structural sense. CFOs didn't sign off on maintenance records. Unless the reason for their involvement wasn't financial. Unless the reason was something else entirely. Diana photocopied the page, put the original back exactly where she'd found it, and went upstairs to prepare for the morning's work. She had 4 other cases open. She had a conference call at 9. She had a perfectly functional professional life that had nothing to do with flight logs or missing calibration protocols or a man who fixed helicopters and raised his son and didn't raise his voice even when he had every right to. She put the photocopy in the inside pocket of her blazer and tried to pay attention to other things. She managed it mostly until Gerald Holt called her into his office at 4 that afternoon and told her to make the coal situation go away. Holt's office occupied the corner of the 14th floor, and it had the kind of view that people put in offices to remind visitors of the distance between themselves and the ground. He was a large man in his early 60s, silver-haired and careful-mannered, the kind of executive who had learned to perform reasonableness so thoroughly that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing until you caught him in a moment of genuine alarm, as Diana was catching him now. And the performance slipped just enough to show the calculation underneath. "He's going to file," she told him. "He's already said so. He has text messages from Reed establishing the scope of work and the rate. That's going to be enough for a labor tribunal." "Then settle," Holt said. "Low. Make it go away." "He's asking for 14.2. That's not an unreasonable number for 11 days of specialized technical work. If we lowball him, he'll decline, and we'll be in front of a judge anyway." "Then make the offer high enough that he takes it." Holt's voice was very even. "I want this closed, Diana. Quietly and quickly. Whatever it costs, within reason, and I mean within very conservative reason, is preferable to litigation." Diana watched him. In 7 years of working for Halcyon, she had watched Gerald Holt navigate hostile acquisitions, a shareholder lawsuit, a discrimination claim that had national press attention for 2 weeks, and a contract dispute with a European charter operator that had dragged on for 18 months. He had not, in any of those situations, told her to make it go away within the first 24 hours. He had not, in any of those situations, said quietly and quickly, with that specific layer of urgency underneath the calm. "Gerald," she said, keeping her voice professional, "is there anything about this situation I should know before I approach him?" "It's a straightforward payment dispute," Holt said. "That's all it is." He met her eyes steadily. She met his back. And the thing about Diana Voss was that she had been a lawyer long enough to know that when someone tells you something is straightforward, the word itself is a flag. Straightforward things don't need to be described as straightforward. "I'll reach out to his attorney," she said. She left the office with the photocopy still in the inside pocket of her blazer, and the word non-reportable sitting at the back of her mind like a stone in a shoe. The letter arrived at Marcus's shop, a converted bay garage on the east side of town where he ran his one-man avionics repair business, on a Tuesday morning via certified mail, which meant someone had wanted to make sure he received it and could not claim otherwise. He signed for it, set it on the workbench next to the fuel control unit he was rebuilding for a private operator in Ohio, and finished the connection he was soldering before he opened it. The letter was from Halcyon Aviation's legal department. It was written on the kind of letterhead that is designed to communicate institutional weight, heavy paper, embossed, seal the address of a downtown building that charged $400 an hour for the square footage alone. It was addressed to Marcus James Cole, and it informed him in 3 paragraphs of language so precise it had clearly been written by someone who chose words the way a surgeon chose instruments, that Halcyon Aviation had become aware of concerns regarding unauthorized modification of proprietary aircraft systems, that any further interference with Halcyon property would be considered a violation of federal aviation regulations, and that Halcyon reserved all rights under applicable law. It did not say, "Pay us or else." It said something much more effective, which was, "We have lawyers who speak fluent federal regulation, and you should be afraid." Marcus read it twice. Then he set it on the workbench and went back to the fuel control unit. He called Leon Marsh at noon. Leon was not technically his attorney. Leon was a former law school classmate of Marcus's brother who had pivoted from corporate law to labor law after a mid-career crisis that Marcus had never asked about but had benefited from repeatedly. Leon was sharp and underpaid and owed Marcus a rebuilt alternator from 18 months ago. "They sent you an intimidation letter?" Leon said, when Marcus had read him the relevant sections over the phone. "That's what I thought. It's a nice one. Standard construction, but good word choices. Their legal team knows what they're doing." "Is it going to be a problem?" A pause. The sound of Leon clicking a pen. "It would be a problem if you had actually done something unauthorized. The question is whether the work you did constitutes an unauthorized modification or a legitimate repair performed at the direction of a company representative. If Calloway authorized the work and you've got text saying he did, then you weren't operating unauthorized. You were operating under a verbal contract, which is a valid contract in this state." "And the component I installed, is it still in the aircraft?" "As far as I know. And it's your design, your intellectual property. I built it myself. The protocol it runs on, I developed over about 4 years. It's not patented. I never got around to it. But I've got dated documentation going back to the design stage. Notebooks, digital files, time-stamped." Leon was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, if that component is proprietary to you and is currently installed in their aircraft and they haven't paid you and they're not letting you retrieve it, then they're sitting on my property," Marcus said. "That's one way to put it." Another click of the pen. "File the claim. We're not waiting. Their letter is designed to make you hesitate. The correct response is to not hesitate." Marcus filed the claim the following morning in person at the County Labor Relations Office, in a building that smelled of floor wax and government patience. The clerk was a woman named Patty, who had been processing claims for 22 years and regarded every piece of paperwork with the same expression of serene neutrality. She took Marcus's documentation, the text messages, the hangar access records he'd photographed on his own phone the last time he was in the building, the time-stamped invoices he'd generated in his own system and never been given cause to submit. And she told him a hearing would be scheduled within 30 days. He thanked her and drove to school to pick up Eli, who was in a better mood than yesterday because Miss Patterson had reconsidered the eagle and now thought it might in fact be an eagle, or at least an eagle-adjacent bird of some authority. The second failed attempt to operate the H145 happened that same week on a Thursday, and Marcus learned about it not from Halcyon, but from a contact at the Regional Avionics Supply Company who'd gotten a call asking about a specific type of actuator calibration software. A call that described the symptoms so precisely that his contact had called Marcus directly, not knowing what else to do. They described it perfectly. His contact, a man named Bobby Ferris, told him over the phone. Navigation interface boots clean primary systems check out. But the moment you try to engage the actuator array, the whole management system throws a fault code that doesn't exist in any published database. I've never seen it. I told them I'd never seen it. They got quiet and hung up. Marcus sat with that. "Who called you?" "Someone from their maintenance team. Young guy, nervous. He mentioned they'd brought in an outside engineer to look at it." "Did the outside engineer figure it out?" "If he had, they wouldn't have called me," Bobby said. "Marcus, what did you put in that helicopter?" "Something that works," Marcus said. "Something that I built." Bobby was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to help them?" "When they pay me," Marcus said. "I'll be happy to." Diana heard about the second failed attempt from the maintenance director, a man named Phil Garrett, who had the particular exhaustion of someone managing a situation that was above his clearance level and knew it. He stopped by her office on Friday afternoon with a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking and the kind of face people make when they need to tell someone something bad. "The H145 is completely inoperable," he said. "The outside technician we brought in spent 2 days on it, and he's never seen a fault code like this." He's saying whatever's in that actuator assembly isn't using any standard calibration protocol. It's running on something proprietary, something he's never encountered, and without the source documentation, he can't interface with it. Diana set down her pen. Source documentation. The design specs for whatever component is installed, the calibration parameters, the protocol. Phil wrapped both hands around his mug. "We don't have any of that. We searched the system for any records related to Cole's work, and there's nothing. It's like he was never here." Diana thought about the visitor badge logs. 31 entries, 11 days. "He was here," she said carefully. "We have the access records." "The access records tell us he came and went. They don't tell us what he installed or how to run it. And I've got 3 charter clients scheduled over the next 6 weeks who booked specifically for that aircraft." Phil finally took a sip of his coffee, grimaced. "Diana, I don't know what's going on with the legal side, but from where I sit, we need that man back in the hangar." After he left, Diana sat for a long time, looking out the window at the city's honest indifference to everyone's problems. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out the photocopy of the incident summary with GH initialed at the bottom and the word non-reportable circled in her own handwriting. She had a number for Reed Calloway in Denver. She'd had it since his transfer, kept in her contacts the way you keep things you're not sure you'll need but don't want to lose. She took out her personal phone, not her work phone, her personal phone, which was a distinction that felt important right now. And she dialed. Reed picked up on the 3rd ring. He sounded like a man who had recently received good news about something unrelated and was not yet ready to give it up. "Diana, hey, what's going on?" "I'm calling about the H145, she said. "And about Marcus Cole." A silence. Not long, but not nothing. "I'm not sure I'm the right person." "Reed, I'm calling off the record. Personal phone, personal call. I'm not recording this, and I'm not writing a memo about it. I just need to understand what happened." Another silence longer. She could hear him breathing. "What do you need to know?" "I need to know why your initials are on a work authorization for a contractor whose name was subsequently removed from all our systems. And I need to know what flight log 7 Alpha is." The silence that followed this was of a completely different quality. It had the texture of someone calculating very quickly the distance between where they were and where they'd been. "Diana," Reed said, "I like you. I always thought you were straight, so I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told anyone, and I'm going to tell you to be careful." "I'm listening." "Don't look for 7 Alpha through official channels. It's not there." And he stopped. "Look, I can't talk about this on the phone. I mean it. But I'll tell you this much. What happened before Marcus Cole came in, that's the thing you need to understand, not what he did. What happened before?" "A non-reportable incident," Diana said. Another long pause. When Reed spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Check who filed the non-reportable classification. Check who had the authority to make that call. And then ask yourself why a CFO would have any business touching a maintenance incident report." He paused again. "That's all I can give you. Diana, be careful." He ended the call. Diana sat in the gathering dark of her office, with the city below her and the photocopy in her hand, and the particular heavy clarity of someone who has just realized that the thing they were hired to manage is not the thing they were told it was. She thought about Marcus Cole, who had come into the lobby with his hands loose at his sides and asked for what he was owed, with the dignity of someone who had learned that dignity was the only thing that couldn't be taken away. She thought about Eli, who she didn't know existed, but who was 9 years old and did his father's math without being asked. She thought about Gerald Holt, who had told her this was straightforward. And then she opened her laptop and started writing down everything she knew in a document she saved to her personal cloud, and not to the Halcyon server, because straightforward things don't need to be hidden. and she was beginning to understand that this particular thing had been hidden very carefully for a very long time. The preliminary hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in a conference room at the County Labor Relations Building. Not a courtroom, not yet, but a room that served the same function of making everyone slightly uncomfortable through institutional furniture and fluorescent lighting. Marcus arrived 7 minutes early, with Leon and a manila folder. Diana arrived 4 minutes later with a paralegal and a briefcase. They did not look at each other when they sat down across the table. Then they did briefly, and looked away. The hearing officer was a woman named Sandra Kwan, who had the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and was waiting patiently and without particular optimism for something new. She asked both parties to state their positions. Leon spoke first, clearly and without ornamentation. Marcus Cole had been verbally contracted by an authorized Halcyon representative, Reed Calloway, then project manager, to diagnose and repair a fault in the H145 actuator assembly. He had performed 11 days of work, resolved the fault, and been verbally promised payment of $14,200, a figure established in written text messages. He had not been paid. He was seeking the agreed compensation plus interest. Diana spoke second, and Marcus listened to her with the attention he gave to machines that were making sounds they shouldn't. She was precise and controlled, and she presented Halcyon's position accurately. No formal contract, no purchase order, no vendor registration, no documented agreement that would constitute a binding obligation under the applicable statutes. But something in her delivery was different from the lobby. In the lobby, she had been definitive. Here, she was careful. Careful in a way that suggested precision rather than certainty, which was a distinction Marcus was fairly sure only another careful person would catch. Sandra Kwan looked at both of them. "Mr. Cole," she said, "do you have the text messages you've referenced?" "Yes." He slid a printed packet across the table. 15 pages. He'd been thorough. Sandra reviewed them. Diana reviewed her copy. Marcus watched Diana's face while she read, not because he was looking for weakness, but because he was the kind of person who read people the way he read instruments, looking for what was actually happening behind what the display was showing. She read the texts. Her expression didn't change, but something in her stillness changed. It was the stillness of someone who has found something they were half looking for and are now deciding what to do about it. "Ms. Voss," Sandra Kwan said, "do you dispute the authenticity of these messages?" "We don't have a basis to dispute authenticity at this time," Diana said. "However, we do contest the legal interpretation. Mr. Calloway was not authorized to enter into service contracts of this scope on behalf of Halcyon. Any commitment he made would have been outside his authority. If the company routinely used contractors coordinated by project managers," Leon said, not aggressively, just levelly, "and regularly paid for such work, then the question of whether Calloway had implicit authority is very much a legal question, and one we'd argue the evidence supports." The exchange went on for 40 minutes. It was not dramatic. Labor tribunal proceedings rarely are. But Marcus noticed several things that Diana never made an argument she couldn't support. That twice she paused before making a claim that would have been easy and plausible, but chose instead to say something narrower and more accurate. And that when Leon made a point she clearly agreed with, she didn't fight it. She redirected. She was a good lawyer. More than that, she was an honest one. The difference was visible if you knew what to look for. Afterward, in the hallway, Leon clapped Marcus on the shoulder and said, "That went well. Their position is technically sound but thin. If Calloway will testify about the authorization, it falls apart." "Will he testify?" Leon made the face of a man who was being optimistic professionally. "He's in Denver. He's not a party to this. But he can be subpoenaed if it comes to that." He glanced toward the far end of the hallway, where Diana was speaking quietly with her paralegal. "She's good, by the way. The Voss woman? She didn't say anything she couldn't prove." "I noticed," Marcus said. He drove to school and picked up Eli and told him the hearing had gone okay. Eli asked what okay meant in lawyer terms, and Marcus said it meant not bad and not good, but moving forward. Eli considered this, and said it sounded like when you were in the middle of a repair and hadn't found the actual problem yet. Marcus said that was more or less exactly right. That night, after Eli was in bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his notebooks. 3 composition books filled with years of technical notes, diagrams, and calibration records. The paper documentation he'd kept because he had a specific distrust of servers that had turned out to be, on this occasion, entirely justified. He found the section on the actuator protocol, 7 months of development documented in his own handwriting from the initial concept to the final parameters he'd used on the H145. Dated, numbered, annotated. He sat with it for a while. Then he took out his phone and took careful photographs of every relevant page, emailed them to Leon, emailed them to himself, and uploaded them to his personal cloud storage. If this went further, he was going to need these. He'd known that from the moment he filed the claim. But sitting with the notebooks in the kitchen, quiet, with his son asleep down the hall, he also knew something else. These notes were the only thing he'd invented that was truly his. The only thing the system couldn't take away, because it had never been inside the system. He'd kept it outside deliberately, not as strategy, but as instinct. The same instinct that made him write his notes on paper instead of a company tablet. The cost of winning this, if winning required revealing the protocol, was real. He sat with that cost and measured it honestly, the way you measure a fault you've found before you decide what to fix. Diana called the number she'd been given for the former chief maintenance engineer, a man named Howard Briggs, who had resigned from Halcyon abruptly 15 months ago. She'd found his contact through a professional directory cross-referenced with an old employee file she technically still had access to, because no one had thought to revoke her permissions. She called him on her personal phone on a Saturday morning from the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 miles from her apartment, because she had developed a specific and rational discomfort with having certain conversations inside any building associated with her employer. Howard Briggs picked up on the 5th ring with the wariness of someone who was expecting either good news or bad news, and had learned to hope for neither. When Diana identified herself, the wariness intensified into something she could hear clearly not hostility, but the sharp vigilance of a man who had made a choice and was being asked to revisit it. "Ms. Voss," he said. "I wondered if someone from legal would call eventually." "I'm calling on my own," she said. "Not on Halcyon's behalf. Not officially." "That's what they all say." "I know. I'd say the same thing in your position." She kept her voice steady and her coffee warm in both hands. "Mr. Briggs, I found the incident summary, the non-reportable classification. I found Gerald Holt's initials on it, and I found a reference to Flight Log 7 Alpha that leads nowhere." Silence on the line. Then, "Where are you calling from?" "A parking lot." "Personal phone." Another pause. "What do you want to know?" "What actually happened to that helicopter before Marcus Cole came in to fix it?" The pause this time was long enough that Diana wondered if he'd disconnected. Then Howard Briggs said in the voice of a man releasing a weight he'd been carrying uphill for 14 months, "It wasn't a pre-flight incident. It was an in-flight incident. The H145 developed a partial actuator failure during a cargo positioning flight. No passengers, thank God, but the pilot had to put it down hard in a field outside the service area. The pilot injured his shoulder significantly. He needed surgery." Diana's hand tightened on her coffee cup. "And this wasn't reported to the FAA. Holt made the call. He said the pilot hadn't filed a report yet, and if we moved fast, we could classify it as a ground incident and contain it internally. He said the liability exposure from a proper incident report, given the client contracts we had in play at the time, would be catastrophic." A bitter sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I objected. I objected in writing, which is in my personal files, and nowhere Halcyon can get to them. Holt overruled me. 2 weeks later, Marcus Cole came in to fix the actuator fault that caused the whole thing, but Holt needed it done off the books. No official contractor record. Nothing that could be tied to an official maintenance event, because an official maintenance event would raise questions about why the previous event wasn't reported. So Marcus fixed a helicopter that had been involved in an unreported incident, Diana said, and was himself never officially recorded as being there. Correct. And when he asked to be paid, the last thing Holt could afford was a payment record that would appear in an audit trail. Another pause. Ms. Voss, I quit because I wouldn't sign off on the non-reportable classification retroactively. Holt found someone who would. The pilot, his name is Aaron Tice, took a settlement and a non-disclosure. He's not going to come forward voluntarily. Diana stared at the middle distance of the parking lot. Did Marcus Cole know any of this? The incident? The unreported status? No, Howard said. He was told it was a routine technical fault. He had no reason to ask more. He was called in to fix something specific, and he fixed it. He has no idea he's sitting in the middle of an FAA violation. Mr. Briggs, Diana said carefully, do you still have the documentation you mentioned? The written objections. I do. Would you be willing to speak with an attorney? Not mine, an independent aviation attorney. A very long pause, the longest one yet. Why? Because, Diana said, I think we're both at a decision point, and I don't think either of us made the right call the first time around, but I think we both still have time to make the right call now. Howard Briggs was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Then he said, "Send me a name." Diana finished her coffee in the parking lot after the call ended, sitting with the specific heaviness of someone who has just committed to a direction they can't uncommit from. The day was warm and ordinary around her. People went in and out of the coffee shop with their drinks and their Saturdays and their uncomplicated errands. She thought about Marcus Cole in the lobby, with his hands loose at his sides. She thought about a pilot named Aaron Tice, who had injured his shoulder and taken a settlement and signed a paper promising not to talk about it. She thought about Gerald Holt's initials in the corner of a document that should never have been classified the way it was. She thought about what it meant to be a good lawyer versus an honest one, and whether she had spent 7 years confusing the two. Then she drove home and wrote down everything Howard Briggs had told her in the same personal document she'd started earlier that week, and she kept it in the same place where Halcyon couldn't reach it. The international technical team arrived on a Monday. 3 engineers from a European aviation consultancy that Halcyon had contracted at considerable expense. Men who between them held credentials from 3 different aviation authorities and had been told, according to what Marcus heard from Bobby Ferris, that this was a complex but ultimately solvable calibration issue. They spent 2 full days in the hangar. On Wednesday afternoon, the lead engineer, a German named Klaus Hoffmann, who had 40 years of experience and the unhurried confidence of someone who has solved every problem he's ever encountered, submitted a formal written report to Halcyon's operations director. Marcus did not see the report, but Bobby Ferris heard about it from his contact at the supply company that had been called in to potentially source replacement parts. And Bobby called Marcus because Bobby was constitutionally unable to sit on information. They can't do it, Bobby said. Hoffman's report says, and I'm reading from what I was told, so this is secondhand, that the actuator assembly contains an unidentified proprietary component interfacing with the management system via an undocumented communication protocol that does not correspond to any known standard. The component appears to be custom fabricated. Without the design specifications and calibration parameters for this component, any attempt to interface with or bypass it risks permanent damage to the management system. He recommends sourcing the original fabricator. He used that phrase, Marcus said. Original fabricator. Word for word. Marcus sat on his workbench and looked at the fuel control unit he'd been rebuilding, which was almost done, and thought about what it felt like to be right about something, in a way that didn't feel like winning. They're going to come to me, he said. Probably, Bobby said. They should have come to me 3 months ago. Also probably, Bobby said. Marcus, what are you going to do? Marcus thought about Eli asking what good or bad meant in this context. He thought about the composition books in the kitchen drawer. The right thing, he said. Whatever that turns out to be. Gerald Holt appeared outside the Labor Relations Building the following Thursday, 20 minutes before Marcus's second preliminary session with Sandra Kwan. He was waiting near the entrance in a gray suit that communicated control, and he stepped toward Marcus with the measured ease of someone who had planned exactly how this interaction would go. "Mr. Cole," he said, "do you have a moment before you go in?" Leon was parking the car. Marcus stood on the sidewalk in the thin morning light and looked at Gerald Holt with the same attention he gave to any machine he hadn't worked on before. "I have a few minutes," he said. "I want to be direct with you." Holt's voice was precisely calibrated, warm, reasonable, man to man. "I think this situation has gotten more complicated than it needed to be, and I want to take responsibility for that. Bureaucratic failures on our end. I'd like to make it right." He paused, with the pause of someone who had rehearsed it. "We'd be willing to offer you $28,000 to settle this matter today. Confidential settlement, no admission of liability. You'd need to provide Halcyon with the full technical documentation for the work you performed, including the calibration protocol and component specifications as part of the agreement." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "That's twice what you owe me." "Yes, and in exchange, I give you the protocol, and I stay quiet." Holt's expression was the expression of someone saying yes without saying yes. It would resolve everything cleanly. Marcus thought about Aaron Tice, whose name he did not yet know. He thought about a pilot putting a damaged helicopter down hard in a field outside the service area. He thought about non-reportable. He didn't know about any of that yet, not explicitly, not by name, but he had spent enough years reading machines to recognize when something was broken in a way that went deeper than the visible fault. He'd known since the lobby in some corner of his instinct that the resistance to paying him was not about money. The money was too small to explain the thoroughness of the erasure. "No," he said. Holt's warmth dimmed slightly, like a light on a dimmer. "Mr. Cole, I'd encourage you to think about what's practical here. You have a son. This is a certain outcome. Litigation is not." Marcus felt something move through him. Not anger, something quieter and more durable. "My son," he said, "is the reason I'm doing this the right way. Because he's going to grow up watching how I handle things that are hard." He nodded toward the building entrance. "I'm going in now." He left Holt on the sidewalk and went inside, and he didn't look back because looking back would have suggested some part of him was uncertain. And he wasn't. He was the opposite of uncertain. He was the most certain he had been about anything since he'd stood at a hospital bedside and promised himself that his son was going to grow up knowing what it looked like when a person didn't break. Diana had known about the approach in advance. Holt had not told her another signal in a conversation that was now nothing but signals. But she had seen him leave early the previous afternoon in the direction of the building where their outside counsel kept offices. And she had put the pieces together the way she'd been putting pieces together for 3 weeks now, quietly and alone, and without telling anyone what she was assembling. She had the document. The full document now, not just the incident summary, but everything she'd gathered. Howard Briggs's contact information and his statement of willingness to speak with an independent attorney. Reed Calloway's oblique but traceable reference to the cover-up. The access logs with Marcus's 31 visits, the initialed incident summary, the reference to Flight Log 7 Alpha that led to nowhere, because nowhere was where someone had put it. She had it organized into a coherent chronology, with sources noted and copies in 3 separate locations, because she'd spent enough years in law to know that single copy documentation had a way of ceasing to exist at inconvenient moments. She also had, from a source she was not going to name, a copy of Klaus Hoffmann's technical report. She'd read it 4 times. The language was careful and European, and utterly damning in its precision, an unidentified proprietary component, an undocumented communication protocol. Without the design specifications, any attempts to interface risks permanent damage. What it meant, translated from technical German precision into plain English, was that Halcyon Aviation had fired the only person in the world who could run their aircraft, and they had done so in the process of trying to erase him from their records. and they were now in possession of a $14 million helicopter that was, for all practical purposes, a very expensive stationary object. She was thinking about all of this when her office phone rang, and it was Gerald Holt, and he told her that Marcus Cole had declined the settlement, and that she needed to find a legal mechanism to compel disclosure of the calibration protocol. "Compel disclosure," she said. "It's installed on our aircraft. We have a property interest." "Gerald," she said. She had not called him Gerald in a professional context since her second year at the company. She said it now because she needed him to hear that something had changed. "I want to talk to you about Flight Log 7 Alpha." The silence on the phone was complete. It was the silence of someone on the other side of a door that has just been opened without permission. "Come to my office," he said. His voice was different now, flatter. "Now." She went. Holt's office in the late afternoon had a different quality than it did in the morning. The light came in lower, and it made the room feel both larger and more exposed, as though the things usually in shadow were being asked to account for themselves. He was standing at his window when she came in, not sitting, which was unusual. He turned when she closed the door. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. No warmth now, no performance of reasonableness. Diana sat down without being invited, to which was also something she had not done before. She set the photocopy of the incident summary on his desk with G.H. and the date visible. "I found it in the paper archives," she said. "I also spoke with Howard Briggs." Something crossed Holt's face, a rapid, calculating adjustment. "Howard Briggs left this company under contentious circumstances. Anything he told you?" "He told me there was an in-flight incident," Diana said. "Not a pre-flight incident, an in-flight incident that caused property damage and pilot injury. He told me you made the call to classify it as non-reportable. He told me he objected in writing. He told me Aaron Tice had surgery on his shoulder and signed an NDA." She looked at Holt steadily. "I'd like you to tell me which part of that is incorrect." The silence was long enough that it was its own answer. Holt walked to his desk and sat down slowly, and for a moment he looked his age in a way he usually didn't. Then he said, "Diana, you've been with this company for 7 years. You're on the partner track. You have a future here that—" "Tell me what I got wrong," she said. "If I got something wrong, tell me what it is." He didn't. He looked at her for a long moment with the eyes of someone calculating, and what he calculated was something she could see even if she couldn't hear it. Then he said, "If you take this outside, you take it without the backing of this company. You take it as an individual, and anything you may have touched, anything you may have been aware of during your time here." "I became aware of it 3 weeks ago," Diana said. "And I've documented exactly when and how I became aware and what I've done since. I have that documentation in multiple locations, and it includes the fact that I came to you with what I found before doing anything else." She paused. "Gerald, I'm giving you the opportunity to get ahead of this, to call the FAA yourself today, voluntarily. The difference between a voluntary disclosure and a compelled one is significant under the statutes. You know that." "You're threatening me," he said. "I'm being your lawyer," she said, "which is still my job. And what your lawyer is telling you is that the position you're in gets substantially worse if this comes out through a court proceeding rather than through voluntary disclosure. And it will come out through a court proceeding because Marcus Cole is going to keep filing. And every step of that process creates discovery obligations, and you cannot keep a pilot's NDA intact through the discovery process of a federal investigation." Holt stared at her. The light was doing its honest work on his face. "Think about it tonight," she said. She stood. "I need your answer by tomorrow morning, because if I don't have your answer by tomorrow morning, I have my own obligations to consider." She picked up the photocopy from his desk. "This is a copy. I have others." She walked out of his office and down the hallway to the elevator and down 14 floors to the lobby and out through the glass doors into the late afternoon. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the city moving around her and the photocopy in her hand and the specific, irreversible feeling of someone who has passed a point they cannot walk back through. She took out her personal phone. She had Marcus Cole's number from the initial file she'd been given when the case was assigned to her. She'd never used it outside of official context. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she put the phone back in her pocket because she wasn't ready yet, and there was still something she needed to do first. And doing things out of order had always been the mistake she was least willing to make twice. She went back inside and called Howard Briggs, and this time she asked him to send everything to the independent aviation attorney whose name she had given him the week before. Then she went back to her office and wrote 2 more pages in the document that Halcyon couldn't reach. And when she was done, she sat very still in the quiet office and waited to find out what kind of person she had decided to be. The next morning arrived with the quality of mornings that are going to matter, gray and still with the particular gravity of days that have been waiting their turn. Diana was at her desk at 7, which was earlier than usual, and she was not looking at her computer. She was looking at her phone, which sat on the desk in front of her, with the specific presence of something that requires a decision. Gerald Holt arrived at 8:15. She knew because she heard the elevator, then his office door. She gave it 30 minutes. Then she picked up her personal phone and walked to the conference room at the end of the hall, which was empty and had a window that faced east. And she dialed Marcus Cole's number. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he was already awake and working, or already awake and thinking, which, for a man like him, were probably the same thing. "Mr. Cole," she said, "this is Diana Voss. I need to speak with you. Not as Halcyon's attorney, as myself." A pause. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of someone calibrating. "All right," he said. "I found documentation of something significant, something that goes well beyond your payment dispute, something that your attorney needs to know about before your next hearing, and something that the FAA needs to know about regardless of your hearing." She kept her voice even and her eyes on the east-facing window where the morning was doing its gradual thing. "I'm not acting in an official capacity right now. I want to be transparent about that. What I'm about to tell you puts me in a complicated position professionally, but I believe it's the right thing to do, and I've been spending several weeks confirming that belief, so I'm confident in it." Another pause. This one had a different weight. "What did you find?" She told him. Not everything, not every detail, but the structure of it, the shape of it, the in-flight incident, the cover-up, the non-reportable classification, the injured pilot, the NDA, the reason his name had been removed from the system. She told him that he had been called in to fix a helicopter that had been involved in an FAA reportable incident, and that Halcyon had kept him off the books not because of bureaucratic oversight, but because an official contractor record would have raised questions they couldn't afford to answer. She expected anger. She was prepared for anger. Instead, she got a silence that was long and even-textured, and that she slowly recognized as the sound of a man who had known in some interior register that something was wrong, and was now watching that knowledge be confirmed. "The pilot," Marcus said. "Do you know how he's doing?" It was not the first question she'd expected. It stopped her for a moment. "I don't know. His name is Aaron Tice. He signed a settlement and an NDA. Is he still flying? I don't know." Marcus was quiet again. Then he said, "What do you need from me? I need you to keep going. Don't take any settlement offer, not from Halcyon, not from anyone acting on their behalf, without running it past your attorney and an independent aviation attorney. The discovery process in your labor claim is going to create legal obligations for Halcyon to disclose maintenance history, and that's where this unravels for them." She paused. "I've also already contacted an independent attorney and passed along documentation. But it's your proceeding. You have the standing to push it where it needs to go." "And you?" he said. "I'm going to file a report with the FAA today, in my own name, on the basis of what I know and what I can document." She said it simply, the way you say a thing that has stopped being a choice and become just true. "I wanted you to know before I did." "Why?" he said. Not accusatory, just asking. She thought about that, about the answer that was easiest and the answer that was accurate. "Because you've been carrying this without knowing what it was," she said. and you deserved to know. The morning light strengthened slightly in the east-facing window. She could hear him breathing, and it was steady and unhurried, and she was glad for that. "Thank you," he said. It was a straightforward thing, and he said it like he meant it. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "It's going to get complicated before it gets simple." "Most things worth doing," he said, "do." She ended the call and went back to her office and began drafting the FAA report, and she did not rush it because the most important documents she'd ever written had never been the ones she'd written fast. The complication arrived at 9:50 in the form of an email from outside counsel informing Marcus's legal team that Halcyon had filed a motion to have the labor claim dismissed on the grounds of a procedural defect, specifically that the original filing had incorrectly cited the incident date, and that this error, while minor, was sufficient under a narrow reading of the applicable statutes to require refiling, which would reset the timeline and delay the proceedings by 60 to 90 days. Leon called Marcus immediately after. "It's a delay tactic," Leon said. "The argument is thin, and we can fight it, but it's going to cost time, and if they file it before we get to the discovery phase, can they actually win it?" Marcus asked. "Possibly. The judge who draws this could go either way. It's the kind of technical objection that some judges respect and some think is a waste of their time." A pause. "Marcus, I want to be honest with you. If this motion succeeds, we're looking at another 2 to 3 months minimum." "I know that's not—" "I know what it is," Marcus said. He was standing in his shop, the composition books open on the workbench in front of him. He'd taken them out that morning without fully knowing why. "Can we counterfile anything? We can challenge the motion, but there's something that would move faster if you're willing." "What?" "If you were to provide a voluntary technical declaration to the court, a sworn statement detailing the specific nature of the work you performed and the component you installed, including the calibration protocol it establishes, your technical authority in a way that makes the procedural dismissal argument much harder for them to sustain. It demonstrates that the substance of your claim is not in dispute, only the paperwork." Marcus looked at the composition books. 7 months of development in his own handwriting. The thing he'd described to Eli as the only thing he'd invented that was truly his. He thought about what Howard Briggs had said to him when they'd spoken 2 days ago. Howard had called him directly at Marcus's request, after Diana's call, and about what it meant that an unreported incident had stayed unreported, because the people involved had calculated that the cost of silence was lower than the cost of truth. Eli was at school. Marcus was in the shop with the composition books and the fuel control unit that was now fully rebuilt and sitting on the shelf, waiting to be shipped. He thought about his son asking whether the guts of what he was doing were good or bad, and the answer that had always been true, but was more true now than it had ever been. "Let's do the declaration," he said. "Full protocol, full specs, everything." Leon was quiet for a moment. "You're sure that information will become part of the public record?" "I know." "You'll lose the proprietary advantage." "I know that too." Marcus closed the composition books and stacked them neatly, which was something he did when he'd made a decision and was done reconsidering it. "Leon, there's a pilot named Aaron Tice who had to have shoulder surgery because that helicopter was in the air when it shouldn't have been. The only reason anyone knows about it is because the right documents end up in front of the right people. If my protocol is what gets us to discovery, then that's what the protocol is for." Leon took a breath. "Okay," he said. "I'll draft the declaration. Send me the complete documentation this afternoon." The motion hearing was not the dramatic courtroom scene that people who have watched legal dramas expect a motion hearing to be. It was a 20-minute session in front of a judge named Patricia Olson, who was 61 and had been on the bench for 19 years, and who reviewed Leon's challenge to the dismissal motion with the focused attention of someone who had seen this specific play run before, and was not impressed by the blocking. Halcyon's outside counsel made the procedural argument. It was polished. Judge Olson listened to it with her chin in her hand. Then she read the technical declaration Marcus had provided, all 14 pages of it, in silence, while both legal teams waited. And when she looked up, she said in a voice that was not unkind, but was very precise. "Counsel, I'm looking at a sworn technical declaration from the claimant that establishes in significant detail the nature of the work performed and the specialized component installed. The procedural question you're raising is whether the claim was filed with an incorrect incident date. I'd like to understand why that error, if it is an error, should outweigh the substantive merit of this claim, which appears to be based on work that the respondent's own aircraft currently depends on." Halcyon's counsel said something about procedural integrity. Judge Olson said something about the purpose of procedural rules, which was to ensure fairness, not to create escape routes. The motion was denied. Marcus walked out of the building into the afternoon light with Leon beside him, and Leon said, "That went better than I expected." And Marcus said, "I know." And Leon said, "You're going to get your money." And Marcus said, "I know that too." What he didn't say, what he kept to himself, walking to the truck in the afternoon that had gone warm and yellow, the way April afternoons sometimes managed to in spite of themselves, was that the money had stopped being the point. Somewhere around the moment he'd listened to Howard Briggs describe Aaron Tice putting a damaged helicopter down hard in a field, and that what he was doing now felt less like a fight and more like a repair, which was the thing he knew best: finding the fault, making it right, not performing the work for anyone's benefit except the work's own. The FAA's formal investigation was initiated 4 days after Diana's report. She received the confirmation in an email from the Regional Aviation Safety Office while she was sitting in her car in the Halcyon parking garage, having just been informed by Holt's assistant that her key card had been suspended, pending a review of her conduct. The email was straightforward and official, and contained no drama. It told her that the agency had received her report, and that an investigation was underway, and that she might be contacted for further information. She sat with that for a few minutes. The parking garage smelled of concrete and exhaust, and the specific urban mineral smell of a structure that has been absorbing city air for 20 years. She thought about 7 years in the building above her, about the partner track and the corner office that had been at certain points a real and motivating possibility, about how much easier everything would have been if Flight Log 7 Alpha had stayed where someone had put it. Then she took out her phone and texted the independent aviation attorney whose name was Colleen Wu to let her know the investigation had been confirmed. Colleen texted back within 3 minutes. "Good, we're ready. Howard's statement is complete." Diana sat for another moment. Then she got out of the car because there was no further reason to be in the parking garage, and she drove to a coffee shop and opened her laptop and started looking at job listings for the first time in 7 years. She was not sad about this exactly. She was the thing that comes after sad. The thing that feels like ground under your feet after you've been walking on ice and have finally stopped being surprised that it holds. Gerald Holt resigned from Halcyon Aviation 11 days after the FAA investigation opened. The press release cited personal reasons and the board's mutual agreement to move in a new direction, which was the language organizations used when the departure was not voluntary in any meaningful sense. 2 other senior executives left within the following week. The investigation itself would take months. These things always did. But the shape of it was established early, and the shape was not good for the people who had made the decisions they had made. Aaron Tice's NDA was challenged by the FAA's legal authority to access records relevant to a safety investigation, which superseded the non-disclosure agreement's terms. Tice gave a statement. His shoulder, Marcus learned later, had healed well enough that he was flying again. Not for Halcyon, but for a regional operator in the Southwest, where the weather was consistent, and the maintenance records were, by all accounts, clean. Halcyon settled Marcus's labor claim in full, plus legal fees, plus a figure that reflected what Leon politely called the enhanced leverage created by the circumstances, which came to a total that Marcus did not expect and sat with for a long time after the check arrived. Not because the number was wrong, but because it felt important not to spend it casually. The technical declaration Marcus had submitted became part of the public court record, which meant the calibration protocol was no longer proprietary in the legal sense. What he hadn't anticipated, what Leon had not specifically predicted, and what turned out to be one of those outcomes that feel like a different kind of payment, was that Klaus Hoffmann's firm read the declaration. Hoffmann called him directly 4 weeks after the settlement to ask if Marcus had considered consulting work on a formal basis with European aviation operators who dealt with legacy actuator systems. He had not considered it. They had a long conversation. Several more followed. None of that was something Marcus could have planned. It was just what happened when the work was real and the documentation was honest, and you put your name on the record. He drove to pick up Eli on the afternoon the settlement was confirmed. The same route he always drove, past the same gas station and the same school entrance, and the same tree that Eli had decided looked like a person with a hat. Eli climbed into the truck with his backpack and a library book about migratory birds. "You're in a different mood," Eli said, which was how he announced observations he'd made but hadn't decided how to characterize. "Good different or bad different?" Marcus asked. Eli looked at him. "Good. Like when you finish a repair and it actually works." Marcus smiled at the road. "We got the money," he said, "from the company. It came through." Eli processed this the way he processed most things, from the inside out. "The helicopter money." "Yeah, because they had to pay you. Because they had to pay me, and because some other things that were wrong got addressed at the same time." Eli turned the library book over in his hands. On the cover was a bird in flight, wings spread wide over the illustration of a long, pale coast. "What other things?" "There was a pilot who got hurt a while back because of that helicopter. People made some bad choices about how to handle it, and the pilot's story didn't get told the way it should have." Marcus turned at the light. "Now it has been." Eli thought about this for a long block, then, "Did you fix the helicopter in the end, after they paid you?" Marcus glanced at him. "I provided the documentation to the aviation authorities as part of the legal process. The helicopter's technically operable now with the right maintenance team using the protocol on the public record. So it can fly again." "Yeah, it can fly again." Eli nodded slowly. "Is it going to?" "That's up to them." Eli opened the bird book to a random page and looked at the photograph there. A small brown bird mid-flight, the blur of its wings caught by a camera faster than any eye. "What's the protocol called?" he said. "The one you made. Does it have a name?" Marcus hadn't thought about that. The protocol had always been just the protocol, a thing that existed in notebooks and in his hands, and in the specific way his mind had worked through the problem over 4 years, in the hours between clients and after Eli was asleep. It had never needed a name because it had never needed to be explained to anyone who didn't already understand it. He thought about it for a moment, driving through the yellow afternoon. "Not yet," he said. Eli looked up from the bird. "You should name it." Yeah, if it's yours, it should have a name. Even if other people can use it now." He looked back at the book. "Especially then, so everyone knows where it came from." Marcus felt something move through his chest that he hadn't felt in a while. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter and more sustainable than pride. The thing that comes when you've done something hard in the right way. And the right way turned out to be enough. "I'll think about it," he said. "Eli won," Eli said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Eli Alpha." "No." "Cole Protocol." Marcus considered. It was the simplest answer, and therefore probably the right one. "Maybe," he said. Eli went back to his bird book with the satisfied expression of someone who has won a negotiation without the other party fully realizing it. The truck moved through the afternoon toward home through the ordinary streets of a city doing its ordinary Wednesday things, and Marcus drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the armrest between them. And for a while, neither of them said anything, and the not saying was the comfortable kind, the kind that meant everything was for this moment exactly where it should be. 3 weeks later, Diana drove to Marcus's neighborhood for the first time. She had the address from the case file, which she no longer had official access to, but which she'd written down before she'd left the building for the last time. She sat in her car for a few minutes outside, looking at the house, a modest single story on a street of modest single stories, with a lawn that was noticeably better tended than its neighbors, a basketball hoop in the driveway at a height that had been adjusted for someone shorter than average, a truck that she recognized. She got out of the car and walked to the front door and knocked. And she waited. The door opened, and it was Eli who opened it, small for his age, with serious eyes, and his father's particular quality of attention. He looked at her for a moment with the calm assessment of someone who took in information before drawing conclusions. "Are you the lawyer?" he said. "I was a lawyer," Diana said. "I'm currently unemployed." Eli considered this. "Dad?" he called without looking away from her. "It's the lawyer lady. She says she's unemployed now." A pause from somewhere in the house. Then, "Tell her to wait a minute." "He says wait a minute," Eli reported. "I heard," Diana said. Eli stepped back from the door, slightly not inviting her in, but not closing the door either, and looked at her with the kind of frank curiosity that 9-year-olds have before they learn it's impolite. "Were you the one who helped at the end?" "I tried to," Diana said. "Dad said someone from the company helped. He didn't say who." "Did he say anything else about it?" Eli thought about this with visible seriousness. "He said sometimes people are in a situation for a while before they figure out which side they're on, and that figuring it out late is better than not figuring it out." He paused. "Is that you?" Diana Voss, who had spent 7 years being very good at not being caught off guard, was caught off guard. She looked at this 9-year-old in a clean doorway in the afternoon light and felt something in her chest that was both sharp and oddly clarifying. "Yeah," she said. "That's me." "Okay," Eli said with the equanimity of someone who had gathered the data he needed. He stepped back a little further. "You can come in, probably. Dad'll be out in a second." She stepped inside. The house was orderly in the way of single parents who had built their own systems, not the orderliness of people trying to impress anyone, but the orderliness of people who knew where things were because they needed to know where things were. There were books on the coffee table and a model aircraft kit partially assembled on a TV tray by the couch, and a composition book open on the kitchen counter with handwriting she recognized as precise and technical. Marcus came out from the back of the house, wiping his hands on a rag he had been doing something mechanical, which she was beginning to understand was where he went when he needed to think. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with the same quality of attention she'd first noticed in the Halcyon lobby, that practiced, unperformative assessment. "Ms. Voss," he said. "Diana," she said. "I'm not anyone's lawyer right now." "Diana." He said it carefully, like he was checking whether it fit. Then he looked at Eli, who had arranged himself on the couch with his library bird book in what was clearly a performance of not listening. "Eli, kitchen." "I'm reading." "You can read in the kitchen." Eli went to the kitchen with the book and the expression of someone making a tactical retreat. Marcus gestured toward the couch, and Diana sat, and he sat in the chair across from her. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. "You lost your job," he said. "Technically, I'm on administrative leave pending a review of my conduct. But yes, that's going to resolve into losing my job." She said it calmly because she'd had 3 weeks to make peace with it. "I knew that going in." Marcus looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not." She paused. "Mostly." Something shifted in his face. A very slight adjustment. The kind that meant he'd found something he was going to look at more carefully. "Why'd you do it?" he said. "The whole thing. You could have. There were ways to manage this that didn't blow back on you the way this did." It was a direct question, and she gave it a direct answer, which was the only kind she had left. "Because I figured out what I was actually doing," she said, "which was protecting a cover-up of an injury that someone didn't deserve. And once I figured that out, I couldn't unfigure it." She met his eyes. "And because you came into that lobby and asked for what you were owed with more dignity than most people can manage on their best day, and it made me think about what I was doing with mine." Marcus was quiet for a moment. From the kitchen came the sound of a page turning, which was either Eli genuinely reading or Eli performing reading very convincingly, and the distinction might not matter. "You looking for work?" Marcus said. She hadn't expected that either. "I'm looking, yes. Aviation law is a small community, so I have a consulting arrangement starting up," he said. "European operators' legacy actuator systems. It's going to need someone who can handle contracts and liability questions and communications with regulatory bodies." He said it without particular emphasis, as though he were describing a mechanical problem. "It's not what you were earning." "No," she said. "I'd imagine not." "But it's real work, and it's clean." He looked at her steadily. "Just so you know exactly what it is." Diana looked back at him. The afternoon light was doing its work through the window behind him, and he was sitting in it with the natural ease of someone who didn't spend much energy worrying about how he appeared, which was one of the things she'd noticed about him in the lobby, and which she noticed again now, more fully. "I appreciate that," she said. "The being clear about what it is." "I've had a complicated few months, with unclear situations," he said. "I prefer clear." "So do I," Diana said. "I just forgot that for a while." From the kitchen. "Dad, can Diana stay for dinner?" Marcus looked at the kitchen doorway. "Eli." "I'm just asking." "We're talking." "I know. I'm asking for after." A pause. "I'm making the pasta." Marcus looked back at Diana with the expression of a man whose 9-year-old has just outmaneuvered him in front of company. Diana felt something unknot in her chest. Something she hadn't known was knotted. And she thought about 7 years of dinners eaten at her desk in an office that smelled of expensive recycled air, and about the particular quality of this house that wasn't impressive and wasn't trying to be, and about an eagle drawing that may or may not have looked like a chicken. "If Diana wants to stay for dinner," Marcus said, measuring it carefully, "that's Diana's call." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I haven't had anyone make pasta for me in a long time." "It's good pasta," Marcus said, and almost smiled, which was the closest thing to an invitation she needed. Much later after dinner, and after Eli had shown Diana the composition book page where his father had written the first draft of what would eventually become the Cole Protocol, which Eli had announced she was allowed to see because she was, quote, part of the story. And after Eli had gone to bed with his bird book and the house had gotten quiet, Marcus and Diana sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and the conversation moved in the slow, unhurried way of people who have been through something together and are only beginning to understand what that means. "The pilot," Marcus said, "Aaron Tice. I'd like to reach out to him at some point. Not for anything legal, just I'd like him to know that someone thought about him." "I think that's a good thing to do," Diana said. "Not right away, when things settle." "Things are settling," she said. He looked at his coffee cup. "The consulting work. I meant it. It's not charity." "I didn't think it was," she said. "You don't strike me as someone who does things out of charity." "I do things because they make sense," he said. "You'd make sense in that role." "Because I'm good at contracts and regulatory communications." "Yes." He looked at her. "And because you know how to find the thing that's been hidden and decide what to do about it." Diana looked back at him across the kitchen table in the quiet that had settled over the house, and she thought about what Eli had said in the doorway. Figuring it out late is better than not figuring it out. She thought about the lobby 3 months ago, the cool recycled air and the expensive carpet, and a man who asked for what he was owed with his hands loose at his sides. "I'd like to hear more about what the work actually involves," she said. "I'd like to tell you," he said. The coffee was warm. The house was quiet. Outside, the night was doing its ordinary thing over an ordinary street, and in the kitchen of a house that was not impressive and not trying to be, 2 people who had both taken longer than they should have to find the right direction were finding, carefully and without rushing, that they were facing the same way. That was enough for now. More than enough. That was, in fact, a beginning.